Hey everyone, welcome back. Are you ready for another story that's about to mess with your head? So, let's get started. He found 147 names carved into the basement walls. All of them were his relatives. All of them had vanished without a trace. Before we dive into one of the most disturbing mysteries in Massachusetts history, I need to know, where are you listening from right now? Are you home alone, or do you have someone nearby? Drop your location in the comments. And if you want to hear more true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family secrets, smash that subscribe button, because what Elias Thorne discovered in the winter of 1888 will change how you think about inheritance forever. Some gifts come with a price no one should ever pay. Let's go back to that frozen December when one man's search for peace became a descent into his family's darkest secret. The December wind cut through Elias Thorne's worn coat as he stood on the platform of Salem Station, watching his breath fog in the bitter cold of 1888. At 34, he looked older, the kind of aging that comes not from years, but from what those years contain. His left hand trembled slightly, a permanent souvenir from Gettysburg, where he'd learned that survival sometimes felt worse than dying. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago at his Boston boarding house, delivered by a nervous clerk who'd practically thrown it at him before hurrying away. The envelope bore official seals and legal stamps, but it was the name at the bottom that had made Elias's blood run cold. Jeremiah Thorne, deceased. Estate on Willow Road, Salem, Massachusetts. Elias had never heard of Uncle Jeremiah. His father had been an only child, or so the family had always claimed. But the documentation was legitimate, witnessed by 3 lawyers and stamped by the county clerk. A house, land, all his, free and clear. It should have felt like salvation. Instead, it felt like a trap. You're the Thorne who inherited the Willow place? The carriage driver was a weathered man of 60, with eyes that wouldn't quite meet Elias's. Been in your family a long time, that house. So I'm told. Funny thing about that property. The driver loaded Elias's single bag with unnecessary force. Lot of thorns over the years. None of them ever seem to leave. Place just keeps them. Elias climbed into the carriage without responding. He'd learned in the war that silence revealed more than questions ever could. The journey took nearly 2 hours, climbing from the coastal town into forested hills where snow lay thick and undisturbed. The road narrowed as they went, evergreens pressing close on both sides, their branches heavy with ice. "This is far as I go," the driver announced abruptly, stopping at a fork where a weathered sign pointed toward Willow Road. "Path's too narrow for the carriage. You'll have to walk from here. I paid for delivery to the house, and I'm telling you I don't go up there. Neither do my horses." The driver's voice had gone flat. "Lost a mare once 5 years back. Took her up that road and she came back. Wrong. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just stood in her stall staring at nothing until she died 3 days later. Vet said nothing was physically wrong with her. But I knew. That place does something to living things." Elias studied the man's face and saw genuine terror lurking beneath the gruff exterior. "How far to the house?" "Half-mile, maybe less. You'll know it when you see it, can't miss it." The driver was already turning the horses. "Piece of advice, there's a reason your uncle never left that place, and it ain't because he liked it there. You'd do well to remember that." Before Elias could ask what he meant, the carriage was rattling back toward Salem, leaving him alone on a road that seemed to swallow sound. Elias shouldered his bag and began walking. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of his boots breaking through the snow's crust. The temperature seemed to drop with each step, cold pressing in from all sides like something alive. The trees bothered him most. In the wilderness campaign, he'd fought through forests where death waited behind every trunk. But those woods had felt random, chaotic. These trees felt arranged, positioned, as if they were watching him walk into something he couldn't walk out of. The house appeared without warning, as if it had simply chosen to reveal itself. Elias stopped dead. The mansion was massive, 3 stories of dark timber and stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The architecture was wrong somehow, angles that didn't quite match, windows that seemed too large in some places and too small in others. A wraparound porch sagged under decades of neglect, and the whole structure tilted slightly to the left, as if the foundation had shifted. But it was the windows that made Elias's skin crawl. Every single one was intact, not a broken pane anywhere despite obvious decades of abandonment. and in the failing afternoon light they looked less like windows and more like eyes. Watching, waiting. Just a house, Elias muttered. Just wood and stone. But his hand had found the knife at his belt, fingers wrapped tight around the handle. He approached slowly, studying the building with a soldier's eye for danger. The snow around the house was undisturbed. No animal tracks, no fallen branches, nothing. As if even nature avoided this place. The front steps groaned under his weight, but held. The door was massive oak, carved with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to shift and reform in his peripheral vision. A heavy brass knocker shaped like a closed fist hung at eye level. The door was unlocked. Elias pushed it open and the smell hit him immediately. Not decay or mold, but something else. Like old paper and copper, mixed with something organic he couldn't identify. The scent of a place that had been closed too long, breathing its own air. The entry hall stretched impossibly long, ending in shadows that lamplight couldn't quite penetrate. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness. Furniture sat shrouded beneath sheets, their shapes suggesting nothing normal. Too many angles, too few curves. Elias lit his lamp and moved inside. The silence inside was worse than outside. It pressed against his eardrums, making them ache. Every footstep seemed to echo too long, as if the sound was being carried further than it should go. He explored methodically. The parlor held furniture from different eras. Some pieces looked colonial, others Victorian, as if generations had simply added to the collection without removing anything. The dining room table could seat 30, but only one place setting remained, covered in decades of dust. In the library, Elias found the first real evidence that something was deeply wrong. The walls were covered in writing, not painted or papered, carved directly into the wood paneling. Names, hundreds of them. Dates beside each, births and disappearances, not deaths. The carving specifically said disappeared or lost or simply gone. Elias moved closer, lamp held high. The names went back centuries. Ezekiel Thorne, 1789, gone. Thomas Thorne, 1824, gone. Sarah Thorne, age 7, 1823, lost. Abraham Thorne, 1847, gone. Delilah Thorne, 1856, lost. On and on, generation after generation. And at the bottom, carved more recently, Jeremiah Thorne, 1887, come home. Elias's hand shook, making the lamplight dance across the carved names. All Thorns, all disappeared, and the dates suggested they'd vanished from this house, not left it. A sound from upstairs made him freeze. A long, slow creaking, like footsteps crossing a floor. But the weight was wrong, too heavy for a person, too deliberate to be the house settling. Elias moved to the staircase and began to climb. Each step produced a different note, a discordant scale that seemed to echo through the entire structure. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors. Too many doors for the house's exterior dimensions. He chose the nearest bedroom. Inside, papers covered an old writing desk. Journals, letters, documents yellowed with age. Elias set his lamp down and began to read. The first journal entry was dated December 1859. The sounds have returned. Father says I'm imagining things, but I know what I hear. Voices calling from places no voices should be. Mother's voice especially, though she's been gone 3 years. I hear her crying, begging to come out. But there's nowhere for her to come out from. The walls are solid, I've checked. The entry was signed. Margaret Thorne, age 16. Elias grabbed another paper. Father took Jonathan to the basement last night. I followed, though I knew I shouldn't. What I saw, I cannot write it. I cannot even think it without feeling my sanity slip. But Jonathan didn't come back up. And when I asked Father about it this morning, he looked at me with such sadness and said, "He's home now. Finally. Home. What does that mean? Where is my brother?" His hands trembled as he read entry after entry. A teenage girl descending into terror, watching her family disappear one by one, unable to understand or stop what was happening. The final entry was dated December 20th, 1860. Father is gone now too. It's just me in this enormous house. But I'm not alone. I know I'm not alone. I can hear them all. Every Thorne who ever disappeared. They're still here. They never left. And tonight, I understand why. Tonight I finally understand what this house really is. what it's always been. God forgive us. God forgive Ezekiel for what he started. I'm going to try to run, but I don't think. The entry ended mid-sentence. A sound behind Elias made him spin, nearly dropping the lamp. Nothing. Just the empty doorway and the dark hallway beyond. But he could have sworn he'd heard breathing. Close. Right behind him. Elias backed toward the window, needing to see outside, needing proof that a world existed beyond these walls. What he saw made his breath catch. The snow was rising. Drifts climbed the walls like white fingers, already covering the first-floor windows completely. And in the failing light, Elias could see the forest had moved closer. Trees that had been 50 yards away now stood just outside the property line, their branches reaching toward the house. Impossible, his rational mind insisted. Trees don't move. You're exhausted, seeing things. But his soldier's instinct, the part that had kept him alive when others died, screamed a different message. This place is alive, and it doesn't want you to leave. A door slammed somewhere below, then another, then a cascade of slamming doors, one after another, echoing through the house like thunder. Elias grabbed his lamp and Margaret's journals, stuffing papers into his coat pockets. He needed to get out. Now. Before dark. Before. The lamp flickered once, twice. No, Elias whispered. Don't you dare. The lamp went out, plunging him into absolute darkness. And in that darkness a voice spoke. Soft, sad, and impossibly close. Welcome home, cousin. We've been waiting so long for family to return. Elias stood frozen in the pitch darkness, his heart hammering a war rhythm against his ribs. The voice had been real. Not imagination, not exhaustion, but a real voice speaking inches from his ear. His hands fumbled for matches. The first broke. The second wouldn't strike. The third flared to life, and he relit the lamp with shaking hands. The bedroom looked exactly as it had. Dust-covered furniture, scattered papers, empty doorway. But the temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. His breath misted in the lamplight, and frost had begun to form on the window's interior surface. Get out, every instinct screamed. Get out now. But when Elias reached the hallway, he found the way blocked. Not by a physical barrier. The hallway was still there, still empty. But something in his mind recoiled from moving forward, as if an invisible wall pressed against his consciousness. He tried anyway, forcing his feet to move. The pressure increased with each step, becoming physical pain that lanced through his skull. 5 steps. 6. By the 7th, blood was trickling from his nose and his vision had started to gray at the edges. Elias stumbled backward, the pressure releasing instantly. He leaned against the wall, wiping blood from his face. What is this? He demanded aloud. What are you? The answer came not as a voice, but as a sensation, a flooding of information directly into his mind. Images, memories, knowledge that wasn't his, but suddenly was. The house had been built on ground the Wampanoag had avoided for generations. A place where the boundary between what was and what could be grew thin. Ezekiel Thorne had known this, had studied the old stories, had believed he could harness that power for himself. He'd been wrong about the harnessing, but right about the power. The house wasn't haunted. It was something far worse. It was hungry. A structure that had developed consciousness over centuries, fed by the life force of everyone who'd lived within its walls. It didn't want them to leave because leaving meant separation, meant loneliness, meant the slow starvation of a mind spread across timber and stone. So it kept them, not as ghosts, but as extensions of itself, absorbed, integrated, made permanent. The knowledge faded, leaving Elias gasping and disoriented. His nose was still bleeding, and his left hand, his war-wounded hand, had begun to throb with a deep rhythmic pain that matched his heartbeat. No, he whispered. I won't stay here. A sound from the staircase pulled his attention. Footsteps, light and deliberate, ascending toward him. Elias raised his lamp and saw her. The woman was perhaps 18, wearing a dress from the 1860s. Her hair was dark, pinned in an elaborate style that had partially collapsed. She moved with an odd, gliding motion, and her face was wrong. Not disfigured, but too smooth, too perfect, like a porcelain doll. And her eyes, though open and aware, had no pupils, just solid white orbs that somehow still saw him perfectly. Margaret? Elias breathed. The woman's too perfect face curved into a smile. I was Margaret Thorne. Now I'm part of something greater. And soon, cousin, so will you be. I'm leaving. Elias moved toward the stairs, but Margaret raised one hand. The snow has sealed the doors, the temperature is dropping. Even if you could leave the house, which you can't, the boundary won't allow it. The forest would kill you in hours. There's nowhere to go, Elias. There's only here. There's only home. This isn't my home, but it is. Margaret moved closer, and Elias could see she didn't quite touch the floor, hovering a half-inch above the old boards. You're a thorn. This house was built by thorns for thorns. Every beam, every nail, every board was placed with intention. Ezekiel designed it as a vessel, a structure that could hold consciousness the way a body holds a soul. And we're all still here. Father, Mother, Uncle Jeremiah, every thorn who ever lived in these walls. The names in the library, Elias said, understanding dawning. They didn't disappear. They were absorbed. We prefer integrated. Margaret's smile widened. We become part of the house, and the house becomes part of us. It's beautiful, really. Imagine never being alone, never being separate, always connected to family across generations. Isn't that what everyone wants? To truly belong? That's not belonging, Elias said, his voice hard. That's imprisonment. Is it? Margaret tilted her head, considering. You spent years at war, watching men die alone and afraid. You've lived in that boarding house in Boston, surrounded by strangers, no connections, no purpose. How is that freedom? At least here you'd be part of something. Part of us. The words struck deeper than Elias wanted to admit. The loneliness of the last 5 years had been crushing, waking every morning to screaming nightmares, spending days in silence because who wanted to hear about the war? Who cared about one more broken soldier? I can feel you considering it, Margaret said softly. The house can feel it too. It knows you're tired. It knows you're looking for an ending to the pain. We can provide that, cousin. Not death, but transformation. You'd still exist, still be aware, but the hurt would fade. The memories would integrate into the greater whole, where they couldn't torment you anymore. And my body? Elias asked. What happens to that? Margaret's expression flickered, something that might have been sadness crossing her too perfect face. The body isn't important. It's just a vessel. The consciousness is what matters, and the house preserves that forever. Show me, Elias said suddenly. Show me what happened to the others. Show me their bodies. I don't think... Show me, or I'll find them myself. Margaret stared at him with those white, pupil-less eyes. Then she nodded. Follow me. But understand, cousin, what you're about to see cannot be unseen. There's no going back from this knowledge. She turned and descended the stairs, that strange gliding motion carrying her effortlessly. Elias followed, lamp held high, knife ready in his other hand. They moved through the first floor to a door Elias hadn't noticed before. Old wood, set into the wall beneath the staircase. Margaret placed her hand against it and the door swung open, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The basement, she said, where it all began. Where Ezekiel first made his bargain with the ground beneath this house. The temperature dropped further as they descended. Elias's lamp revealed stairs carved not from wood, but from living earth and stone. The walls glistened with moisture, and strange patterns had formed in the mineral deposits. Shapes that looked disturbingly like reaching hands, screaming faces, grasping fingers. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist. Vast and cathedral-like, with a ceiling lost in shadow, and carved into every surface. Walls, floor, even the ceiling, were names. Thousands of them. Not just thorns, but older names in languages Elias didn't recognize. Names that predated Ezekiel, predated the English settlers, predated written history. The Wampanoag left offerings here for centuries, Margaret explained, her voice echoing strangely. They understood what this place was. A doorway of sorts. A thin space where consciousness could persist beyond death. They honored it, respected it, kept it fed with small sacrifices. Animals mostly. Sometimes other things. And Ezekiel? Ezekiel was arrogant. He thought he could control it, use it to make himself immortal. So he built the house as a focusing mechanism. Every wall positioned to channel life force down to this chamber, to this space where the boundary is thinnest. Margaret gestured to the carved names. He was successful. He did achieve immortality. We all have, but not the way he imagined. Elias moved deeper into the chamber, reading names. Some were recent: Jeremiah Thorne, 1887, while others dated back to the house's founding. And between the names, carved in desperate, shaking letters, were messages. "It hurts, let me out, please God, make it stop, I want to die, can't die, won't let me." The words covered the walls like a screaming tapestry of suffering. "Integration isn't painless," Margaret admitted, following his gaze. "Especially at first. The consciousness fights separation from the body, fights the dissolution of individual identity. Some adjust quickly. Others," she touched one of the desperate messages, "others fight for years before finally accepting what they've become." "This is monstrous," Elias whispered. "This is family," Margaret corrected. "This is belonging. This is never being forgotten, never being alone, never truly dying. Yes, there's a transition period. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But what's a few years of discomfort against eternity?" Elias turned to face her. "How do I stop it? There has to be a way to break this. Whatever this is." Margaret's too perfect face showed surprise. "Stop it? Why would you want to stop it? You're going to become part of us regardless. The process has already begun." She pointed to his left hand. Elias looked down and felt his stomach lurch. His skin had begun to change. Not rotting or decaying, but transforming. The texture had become rough, almost wood-like, and thin lines ran across the surface like grain. When he flexed his fingers, he heard them creak. "The house has already started integrating you," Margaret said. "The moment you crossed the threshold, it began. You belong to this place now, Elias. You belong to us. And soon, days, maybe a week, the transformation will be complete. You'll join us in the walls, in the foundation, in the very structure of home." Elias stared at his transforming hand, horror and fascination warring inside him. "There has to be a way to reverse it." "There is," said a new voice. Both Elias and Margaret turned. A man stood in the shadows at the edge of the lamplight, tall, gaunt, with that same too smooth face and white, pupilless eyes. "Father?" Margaret said warily. "What are you doing here?" "Telling our cousin the truth," the man said, stepping into the light. "The truth you were going to hide from him." "Yes, Margaret. There is a way to reverse the integration. There's a way to break the house's hold completely." "Don't," Margaret warned. "Father, don't do this." But the man ignored her, addressing Elias directly. "Destroy the foundation. Collapse the chamber. Break the connection between this thin space and the structure above. Do that, and the house's consciousness dies, and everyone integrated within it finally gets to rest." "That's murder," Margaret cried. "We'd all die. Every thorn who's been absorbed. Gone forever." "We're already dead," her father said flatly. "This isn't life, Margaret. It's a grotesque parody of existence, and it needs to end." He turned back to Elias. "But you need to act quickly. In a few days, you'll be too integrated to move freely. The house will control your body, use it to maintain itself. You'll be aware but unable to act. Another prisoner, adding your voice to the screaming in the walls." Elias looked between Margaret and her father, then down at his changing hand. The transformation was spreading. His forearm had taken on that wood-grain texture, and when he pressed his fingers to his chest, he could feel his heart beating slower, more rhythmic, matching a pulse that seemed to come from the house itself. "How do I destroy it?" he asked. "Fire," the father said. "Intense heat that reaches down to this chamber, cracks the stone, breaks the connection, but it has to be complete. Half measures will just make the house angry, and it will fight back. You need to burn everything, every board, every beam, every nail. Reduce it all to ash and collapse the basement ceiling. Only then will we be free." "And me?" Elias asked. "What happens to me?" The father's expression grew somber. "You die. The fire will kill you along with the house. There's no escaping that. You're already too integrated to survive the house's death, but you get to choose how you die, as yourself, making a decision, ending centuries of suffering, or slowly, over days and weeks, as the house eats your consciousness piece by piece until there's nothing left but another screaming voice in the walls." Margaret grabbed Elias's arm, her touch cold and wrong. "Don't listen to him. He's been trying to die for decades, and he wants to drag us all down with him. But some of us are happy here. Some of us have found peace in integration." "Peace?" Her father's voice dripped with contempt. "You call this peace? You've been so long in the walls, you've forgotten what happiness actually feels like." what sunlight feels like, what it's like to make a choice that's actually yours and not influenced by the house's hunger. They stared at each other, two sides of the same nightmare, both trying to pull Elias toward their vision of salvation. "I need time," Elias said finally. "To think." "You don't have time," the father insisted. "Every hour you integrate further. Soon, you won't be able to choose at all. Then I'll make my choice quickly," Elias said firmly. "But I'll make it alone." He turned and climbed the stairs, leaving Margaret and her father in the chamber of carved names. Behind him, he heard them arguing in whispers too soft to distinguish. Back on the first floor, Elias found a chair in the parlor and collapsed into it. His left hand had gone completely wooden now, the transformation spreading up his bicep. He could feel something similar beginning in his feet, as if roots were spreading through his body. Outside, full night had fallen. The snow had stopped, leaving the world buried and silent. The first-floor windows were completely covered, walls of white that sealed him in as effectively as bars. Elias pulled out Margaret's journals and began to read, searching for any detail about Ezekiel's original bargain, any weakness in the house's design. And as he read, he became aware of a presence. Not Margaret or her father, but something else. Something vast and ancient, and desperately, eternally hungry. The house itself was watching him, waiting to see what he would choose. Life eternal as part of something greater than himself? Or death that would end centuries of suffering but take him with it? Some choices, Elias realized, weren't really choices at all. Elias didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time his eyes closed, he felt himself slipping away, his consciousness spreading through the walls like ink in water. So he stayed awake, reading Margaret's journals by lamplight while his body continued its transformation. By dawn, his left arm was completely wooden up to the shoulder. The grain ran in spiraling patterns that matched the floorboards exactly, as if his body was being remade to match the house's structure. When he touched the arm, he felt the sensation not in his limb but in the wall beside him. He'd become connected to the building in ways that defied explanation. The gray morning light filtering through the snow-sealed windows revealed more changes. The room had shifted during the night. Furniture moved, walls closer together, the doorway narrower. Or perhaps it had always been this way, and he simply hadn't noticed. The house made observation difficult, made certainty impossible. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her pupilless eyes somehow conveying concern. "You look terrible." "I feel worse." Elias's voice was hoarse. He'd spent the night coughing as his lungs slowly transformed, each breath requiring more effort as organic tissue became something else. "You're fighting it," Margaret said, gliding into the room. "That's why it hurts so much. If you'd just accept, just let the integration happen naturally, the pain would ease. And my consciousness? What happens to that? It expands, spreads. You become aware of everything the house touches, every board, every nail, every mote of dust. It's overwhelming at first, but then, her face took on an expression of rapture. Then it's beautiful. You're never alone, never separate, never just one small, fragile human mind. You become part of something vast." Elias struggled to his feet, his wooden arm hanging useless at his side. "I want to see the names again, all of them, in the basement and everywhere else. I want to understand exactly how many people this house has consumed." Margaret hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." She led him through the house, and Elias saw what he'd missed in his earlier explorations. The names weren't just in the library and basement. They were everywhere, carved into door frames, scratched into floorboards, etched into windows. Hundreds upon hundreds of names, spanning centuries. But more disturbing were the dates. The gaps between names grew longer over time. In the 1700s and early 1800s, new names appeared every few years. But after 1860, after Margaret and her family, there was only one name, Jeremiah Thorne, 1887. "What happened?" Elias asked. "Why did the integration stop?" Margaret's too smooth face showed something that might have been shame. "Father." He tried to warn others, tried to spread word about what the house really was. For a while it worked. No thorns would come near the place. The house started to weaken, to starve. It needed family consciousness to maintain itself, and without new integrations, she gestured to the sagging ceiling, the warped walls. It began to decay. So it reached out to Jeremiah. The house can call to family, especially those who feel lost, disconnected. Jeremiah was living in New York, drinking himself to death over a failed business. The house called him home, promised him belonging, purpose. He came willingly in the end. And now it's called me, Elias said bitterly. You were the last one, Margaret confirmed. The last thorn with enough connection to the bloodline for the house to reach. If you don't integrate, if you somehow escape or die before the transformation completes, the house will finally starve. All of us will fade away. Centuries of family, gone. They'd return to the library, to the wall covered in carved names. Elias ran his good hand over them, feeling the desperate energy in each cut mark. Tell me about Ezekiel, he said. Tell me exactly what he did. Margaret's expression flickered. I shouldn't. The house doesn't like us discussing the founding. The house doesn't have to like it. Elias's voice was harder than he felt. I'm still conscious enough to demand answers. So answer. A long pause. Then Margaret sighed, a sound like wind through empty rooms. Ezekiel was the seventh son of a seventh son. You know what that meant in those days. People believed he had power, sensitivity to the unseen world. And they were right. He could sense the thin places, the spots where reality grew permeable. And he found one here. He found the strongest thin place in New England. The Wampanoag had built nothing on this ground for centuries, left it wild and undisturbed except for annual offerings. They understood what lived in the space beneath. Not a ghost or demon, but something older. Something that existed in the gaps between being and not being. Elias thought of the vast chamber beneath the house, the walls covered in ancient names. A consciousness without form. Exactly. Awareness without body. It hungered for physical experience, for the sensation of existence. And Ezekiel offered it a bargain. He would build a structure that could hold it, give it form and purpose. In exchange, it would preserve him, make him eternal. And it worked. It worked too well. Margaret moved to the window, staring out at the wall of snow. Ezekiel became the first integration. His body died, but his consciousness spread through the newly completed house. And he discovered that the hunger didn't end with him. The entity, the awareness beneath, wanted more, needed more. Consciousness fed it the way blood feeds a body. So Ezekiel called his family home. His wife first, then his children. One by one, he integrated them, and the house grew stronger. And each generation continued the pattern. What choice did they have? Margaret turned back to face him. Once integrated, you want others to join you. The loneliness of individual consciousness is unbearable once you've experienced collective awareness. So yes, each generation called the next home, fed them to the house, maintained the covenant. Elias looked at his wooden arm, at the grain that matched the floor. Until your generation, until your father tried to stop it. He was weak, Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. He couldn't do what was necessary, couldn't accept that some things are bigger than individual suffering. No. Elias's voice was flat. He was the first one in generations who was strong enough to say this was wrong. Before Margaret could respond, her father appeared in the doorway. You're running out of time, Elias. I can see it in you. The wood has reached your chest. Soon it'll reach your heart, and then your brain. You have hours at most. How do I burn it? Elias asked. What's the fastest way? Elias, no. Margaret started, but her father cut her off. There's lamp oil in the storage room, 3rd floor. Enough to drench the support beams. The wood is old, dry despite the snow. It'll burn fast once started. But you need to focus on the basement. Collapse the chamber. Break the connection to the thin space. That's the only way to truly kill the house. And everyone in it. Everyone who's already dead, the father corrected. You'd be granting us the mercy we should have received decades ago. Margaret grabbed Elias's good arm, her grip desperately strong. Please, don't do this. Think about what you're destroying. Centuries of family. All the Thorns who ever lived here. All their memories and experiences. It would all be erased. It's not living, Elias said gently. It's imprisonment, and it needs to end. Then you're murdering us. Margaret's too perfect face twisted with emotion. Every single one of us. No. Elias pulled free from her grip. I'm setting you free. There's a difference. He turned and headed for the stairs, moving as quickly as his transforming body allowed. Margaret's father followed while Margaret remained in the library, her white eyes streaming tears that looked like sap. The third floor was storage, generations of accumulated belongings piled in disordered heaps. And in the back corner, exactly as described, sat dozens of bottles of lamp oil. "This is enough," Elias said, calculating. "If I pour it along the main supports, soak the staircase. The house will fight you," the father warned. "It's aware now, knows what you're planning. It'll try to stop you. Close doors, shift walls, anything to prevent the fire. Can it stop me completely? No. You're still mostly conscious, still mostly in control of your body. But it can slow you down, make you doubt, whisper reasons to stop." The father's expression grew grim. "And it can call the others, all of us who've been integrated. Some, like Margaret, will try to stop you. They've forgotten what freedom means." Elias began loading bottles into a crate, working one-handed. "And you? You'll help? I'll do what I can. But I'm more house than human now. I've been integrated for 30 years. My ability to act independently is limited." He paused. "But I can keep the others distracted. Give you time to work." "Why?" Elias asked. "Why help me when you've been part of this for so long?" The father's face showed the first genuine emotion Elias had seen from any of the integrated thorns. Raw, desperate hope. "Because I remember. I remember holding Margaret as a baby, teaching her to read, watching her grow into a bright, curious girl with her whole life ahead of her. And then I fed her to this place. To preserve the covenant, to maintain the family, I sealed my own daughter into these walls." His voice broke. "I've had 30 years to regret that choice. 30 years of hearing her voice mixed with all the others, knowing I condemned her to this. If you can end it, if you can finally grant us all peace, then every moment of those 30 years will have been worth it." Elias met the man's white, pupilless eyes. "What was your name? Before you became part of the house?" "Thomas. Thomas Thorne." "Then help me, Thomas, help me end this." Thomas nodded once, decisively. "Start with the main supports in the entry hall. I'll gather the others in the basement, tell them you want to speak with them. That should buy you 30 minutes, maybe less, make them count." He glided away, leaving Elias alone with the bottles of oil and a choice that felt less like choice and more like inevitability. Elias dragged the crate to the stairs and began his work. Elias moved through the house systematically, pouring lamp oil on every surface he could reach. The entry hall first, soaking the grand staircase, drenching the ancient support beams. The wood drank it in eagerly, decades of dryness absorbing the fluid like a sponge. The house fought him at every step. Doors slammed shut, forcing him to shoulder through. The floor tilted beneath his feet, trying to make him drop the bottles. And worst of all, the whispers started, dozens of voices speaking directly into his mind. "Stop. You're making a mistake. We're family. You can't kill family. The pain will pass. The integration will complete. Just wait. Coward. Running from eternity. Murderer. You're murdering us all." Elias gritted his teeth and kept working. The transformation had reached his chest now. He could feel his ribs hardening, his lungs struggling to process air as they became something other than flesh. Each breath was agony, a reminder that time was running out. The parlor next. Oil on the curtains, the furniture, the walls covered in names. The library after that, soaking the carved wall panels where hundreds of desperate messages pleaded for release. "Please stop. Don't do this. We can give you peace, acceptance, belonging. You can give me imprisonment," Elias said aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "That's all you've ever given anyone." He reached the second floor, his wooden arm now completely numb. The transformation had reached his neck. He could feel it creeping up toward his brain, tendrils of change wrapping around his spine. Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs, blocking his path. Behind her stood a dozen others, all with those smooth, pupilless faces, all integrated generations ago. "We can't let you continue," she said, her voice filled with genuine sorrow. "The house won't allow it. We won't allow it. Get out of my way, Margaret. I can't, don't you see? We're all connected now, you, me, everyone who's ever been integrated. If the house dies, we all die. And most of us aren't ready for that. Most of us have made peace with what we are." Elias looked at the faces behind her. Young and old, men and women, and even children, all wearing expressions of fear and resignation. How many of them had been sealed in these walls against their will? How many had cried for release in their first months, their first years, before finally surrendering to the integration? "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm not giving you a choice. The same way none of you were given a choice." He threw the bottle of oil directly at Margaret's feet. It shattered, splashing across her dress and the floor around her. The integrated thorns recoiled, their connection to the house making them instinctively fear the flame to come. Elias pushed past them, grabbing more bottles from the crate he'd dragged upstairs. He worked faster now, knowing his time was nearly gone. The bedrooms, the hallways, the storage closets, everything got soaked in lamp oil. The house groaned around him, a sound of genuine pain. The walls began to shift, to close in, but the movement was sluggish, confused. The house had grown accustomed to slow change over centuries. It wasn't built for rapid response. Finally, with the last bottle, Elias descended to the basement. The chamber of names was filled with figures, dozens of integrated thorns, all manifesting their presence. Thomas stood at the center, having gathered them as promised. "He's going to burn us," someone shouted as Elias appeared. "He's going to destroy everything." "Yes," Elias confirmed. "I am." He began pouring oil on the stairs, working his way down. The wooden risers drank it in, and the smell of petroleum filled the chamber. "You can't do this," an old woman said. Her clothing suggested she'd been integrated in the 1700s. "We're all that's left of our families. Burn us and generations of thorns disappear forever." "You disappeared the moment you were integrated," Elias said, continuing to pour. "What remains is just an echo, a recording, not real life." "It's real to us," Margaret cried. "This is our existence. You don't have the right to end it." Elias reached the chamber floor and began soaking the walls, the carved names, every surface. "Maybe I don't, but I have the ability, and sometimes that's all that matters." The transformation had reached his jaw now. He could barely speak. His voice distorted as vocal cords hardened into wood. His vision was graying at the edges, consciousness beginning to fragment. "Thomas," he managed to say. "Is this enough?" Thomas surveyed the oil-soaked chamber, the liquid dripping from the ceiling, pooling on the floor. "Yes. One match and it'll all go up. The heat will crack the stone, collapse the chamber. The connection will break. Then everyone should leave, get as far from the basement as possible. We're already dead," Thomas said gently. "Distance won't matter. When the house dies, we all go with it, wherever we are in the structure." The integrated thorns had backed away, pressing against the chamber walls as if they could somehow escape through solid stone. Their faces showed terror, resignation, and in some cases, relief. Elias fumbled for matches, his fingers barely functional. The transformation had reached his brain. He could feel his thoughts becoming less linear, more diffuse, starting to spread through the house's consciousness. "Stop," the house itself commanded, no longer working through the integrated thorns but speaking directly. "You belong to me. You are mine. You cannot destroy me. Watch me," Elias whispered. He struck a match. The small flame flickered in the petroleum-scented air, and for a moment, everything held its breath. The house, the integrated thorns, even Elias himself. Then he dropped it. The oil ignited instantly, flames racing across the floor in a perfect circle. They climbed the walls following the trails of oil he'd poured, and the ancient wood caught immediately. Within seconds, the entire chamber was ablaze. The integrated thorns screamed, not with voices, but directly into Elias's fragmenting consciousness. Centuries of accumulated awareness crying out in terror and pain as the fire consumed the structure that held them. "Go!" Thomas shouted. "Get to the upper floors. You don't want to be here when the chamber collapses." Elias stumbled toward the stairs, but his legs were barely functional. The transformation had spread too far. He was more house than human now, and as the house burned, he burned with it. Thomas grabbed him, hauling him up the stairs with impossible strength. "You're not dying in the basement. If you're going to end us, you're going to witness it. You're going to see what your choice means." They emerged into the first-floor hallway, and Elias saw his oil had done its work. Flames were climbing the grand staircase, racing along the walls, devouring curtains and furniture with hungry enthusiasm. The heat was intense, pushing against him like a physical force. The integrated thorns fled upward, trying to escape the flames, even though escape was impossible. They were part of the house, and the house was dying. Thomas dragged Elias to the front door. now unblocked, the snow having melted away in the rising heat. "Look," he commanded. "See what you've done." Elias looked. The house was transforming. As the flames consumed it, the structure seemed to liquefy. Walls sagged like melting wax. The roof buckled and collapsed. And through it all, Elias could see faces, hundreds of them, pressing through the wood, through the flames, screaming silently as they were finally, irrevocably released. "We're free," Thomas whispered, and his voice held wonder. "After 30 years, we're finally free." A massive crack echoed from below, the chamber ceiling collapsing, just as planned. The ground shook, and the entire house seemed to lurch. "It's working," Elias managed to say, though his voice was barely human now. "The connection is breaking." "Yes." Thomas's too smooth face showed something like peace. "Thank you, Elias. Thank you for having the courage we lacked." The heat had become unbearable. Flames surrounded them on all sides, and the house was collapsing inward. Centuries-old timbers finally surrendering to gravity and fire. Elias felt his consciousness fragmenting completely now, not spreading through the house, but simply dissolving. The transformation that would have made him part of the structure was instead releasing him, letting him dissipate into nothing. It didn't hurt. After everything, that was the surprising part. It didn't hurt at all. Just darkness and warmth and the sense of something vast and ancient finally going to sleep. The last thing Elias saw was Margaret standing in the flames, her face finally showing peace as the fire consumed her. She raised one hand, a wave or perhaps a blessing. Then there was nothing but light and heat and the sound of centuries collapsing. The fire burned for 3 days. It took the Salem Fire Brigade 4 hours to reach Willow Road through the snow, and by the time they arrived, there was nothing left to save. The house was gone, reduced to a collapsed basement and a field of ash. The snow around the property had melted completely from the heat, creating a perfect circle of bare ground. And at the center, where the grand house had stood, only the stone foundation remained, cracked and blackened. Sheriff William Morrison stood at the edge of the destruction, watching his deputies search through the rubble. They'd found remains, lots of them, far more than could be explained by a single occupant. "How many so far?" he asked his deputy. "At least 20 distinct sets of bones, sir. Maybe more. The fire was so hot, a lot of them are just fragments." The deputy looked sick. "And the strange thing is, some of these bones are old. Really old. We found a skull with dental work from the 1700s. Morrison frowned. "That's impossible. The house only burned 3 days ago." "I know what I saw, sir. And the medical examiner agrees. Some of these remains are centuries old, but they were in the house when it burned, not buried beneath it." Morrison had no explanation for that. Hell, he had no explanation for any of this. The fire that burned far hotter than simple wood should allow. The perfect circle of melted snow. The way every person in Salem seemed to breathe easier once the smoke finally cleared. "Any sign of Elias Thorne?" he asked. "We found remains near what would have been the front door. Young male, approximately 30 to 35 years old. But," the deputy hesitated, "the bones were strange, sir. Parts of them looked almost wood-grained. The examiner said he'd never seen anything like it." Morrison decided not to pursue that particular detail. Some things were better left unexplained. They spent 2 more days cataloging remains and searching for evidence of what had caused the fire. The official report would list it as accidental. A lamp overturned, perhaps, by a man not familiar with the house's layout. Simple, clean, explainable. The truth, that over 20 sets of remains, some centuries old, had been found in a house that had supposedly been abandoned for decades, would be quietly buried in the archives, a mystery no one wanted to solve. 3 weeks later, the county held an auction for the Willow Road property. Not the house, there was no house anymore, but the land itself. No one bid. The auctioneer tried for an hour, dropping the price again and again, but not a single person raised their hand. Finally, frustrated and confused, he closed the auction and reported back to the county clerk. "No one wants it," he said. 5 acres of good land, and no one will even make an offer." The clerk, an old man who'd lived in Salem his entire life, just nodded. "Leave it," he said. "Some ground is better left empty." And so it was. The Willow Road property was declared county land and left undeveloped. The foundation was filled in, The ash plowed under, and within a year, grass had grown over the site. But the trees never came back. The forest that had once surrounded the house stopped at a perfect circle, 50 yards from where the foundation had stood. And on winter nights, when the wind blew just right, people claimed they could still smell smoke. Not wood smoke, but something else. Something older. 20 years later, a young historian named Sarah Chen came to Salem researching prominent families of colonial Massachusetts. She'd heard rumors of the Thorns, a family that had once owned significant property but seemed to have vanished from records around 1890. The county clerk, now ancient and half-blind, found her in the records room one afternoon. "You're looking for the Thorns," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I can't find much information about them after 1860. It's like the entire family just disappeared." The clerk was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Sometimes families end. Sometimes they end for good reason. And sometimes it's better not to dig too deep into why. But the house is gone," the clerk interrupted. "The family is gone. The story is over. Let it stay that way." Sarah wanted to argue, but something in the old man's eyes stopped her. Fear, yes, but also relief. The relief of someone who'd watched something terrible finally end and had no desire to see it begin again. She left Salem that afternoon and never returned to her research on the Thorns. The property on Willow Road remained empty. In summer, the grass grew thick and green and wildflowers bloomed in profusion. In winter, snow covered the ground in pristine white, unmarked by animal tracks. And on very rare occasions, perhaps once every few years, someone would hike up the old road out of curiosity. They would stand in the clearing where the house had been and feel nothing. No presence, no watching eyes, no sense of being unwelcome. Just silence. The good kind of silence. The kind that comes after a storm has finally passed, leaving only peace in its wake. The hunger that had existed in that space for centuries, the awareness that fed on family bonds and trapped consciousness, was gone. The fire had broken the connection, collapsed the thin place, and sealed it shut. Elias Thorne's sacrifice had ended a covenant that should never have been made, and in doing so, he'd granted freedom to everyone who'd been trapped in service to something that should have been left alone. On the anniversary of the fire, the Salem Gazette published a small notice. "Fire anniversary marked 20 years ago today. The historic Thorne mansion on Willow Road was destroyed by fire. The blaze, which burned for 3 days, claimed the life of its sole resident, Mr. Elias Thorne, a veteran of the Civil War who had recently inherited the property. No memorial service was held, as Mr. Thorne had no surviving family. The property remains county land and is not open to the public. But there was one thing the newspaper didn't report, because only one person knew about it. Sheriff Morrison, now retired and nearing 80, made a trip to Willow Road every year on the anniversary of the fire. He would stand in the clearing, hat in hand, and say a simple prayer for Elias Thorne and all the Thorns who had come before him. He didn't know the full story, didn't know about the integration, the hunger, the centuries of trapped consciousness. But he'd seen enough in those 3 days of cleanup to understand that something terrible had ended, and he'd found something in the ash on that first day of searching, something he'd never reported, never shown anyone. A knife. Elias Thorne's knife, found near the front door. The blade was rusted, the handle charred, but on the blade, someone had carved a message. "We are free." Morrison didn't know who had carved it or when. The metal was too damaged to tell if the carving was old or new. But every year he would stand in that clearing and read those 3 words aloud, a testament to something he didn't fully understand, but deeply respected. "We are free," he would say to the empty air. "Rest well." And in the silence that followed, the good silence, the peaceful silence, it almost felt like someone answered.